I would have been a great millennial. I would work at ID and my friends would work at Vice and Buzzfeed News and we'd write listicles and Twitter was at its prime. Unfortunately, I was too busy being in the sixth grade to participate. This tweet made the rounds a few weeks back with many media girly close friends of mine posting on those stories about the Buzzfeed team to influencer pipeline. Me. That was me. I mean, hell, I even went as a YouTuber at a future self day in year 12 in 2017. I was promised an adulthood full of optimism and skinny jeans and a stable media job, but alas, that is not a reality for Gen Z. The romanticization of BuzzFeed, in my opinion, was imminent the second that this clip of Marnie and girls singing Stronger became a mainstay on TikTok. Hello and welcome or welcome back to Extra Virgin, and in today's video, we are going to be discussing the increase in nostalgia about BuzzFeed. So get ready to paint with your period blood and pretend that you've never eaten fruit before because we are going back to the promised land. Also, a quick thank you to everyone for getting my first video essay to 100,000 views, which is absolutely crazy to say. I didn't think that my first one would get like 5,000 views, or let alone 100,000. So thank you so much everybody for watching that video. If you haven't watched it, check it out. I'm very proud of it. Also, side note, I hope everyone likes my outfit today. I decided to go for like BuzzFeed ladylike extra cast member, which means very much inspired by Sophia. So I've got like the Kylie lip kit on. Oh, these products are so expired. I hope I don't get sick. Like every video, let's do some quick housekeeping. Firstly, this video is not me defending BuzzFeed in any way. This video is definitely not going to be a love letter to them, nor will I be going through like an extensive BuzzFeed lore. If you want that, here are some fantastic videos. BuzzFeed was founded in 2006 by entrepreneur Jonah Peretti, who in a lot of ways revolutionized the way that we view social media and the internet. In the early days of the internet, a person who would spend all day on their computer in their parents' basement on like chat rooms, they were seen as inherently antisocial. But Jonah had this really clear view about the social nature of social media, saying in an interview, quote, "Built into the media is a relationship, which makes media inherently social," end quote. Within a few years of its launch, BuzzFeed had expanded into news, scripted and unscripted video, celebrity interviews, podcasts, food, among many other arenas. Their content was varied and that may very well have been one of their biggest strengths. There seemingly was something for everyone. If you wanted to see beauty and fashion content, you had Ladylike and Lindsay and Jazz. If you wanted to watch true crime and ghost hunting, well, there are two hooligans just for you. For those who wanted to watch bland hosts with little chemistry spend far too much money on food and pretend that it was worth it, well, you know what to watch. And for those who wanted to watch early scripted content from someone who would go on to become one of the most important people in the comedy writing sphere, well, watch anything that Quinta Brunson did at BuzzFeed. She deserves every single bit of success that she is getting and more. BuzzFeed was one of the leading mainstream media publications with its depictions and discussions about many different social and identity-based issues. I think that the overall consensus is that within the context of the 2010s, BuzzFeed did an occasionally okay job at representing different facets of diversity. However, despite being a place that allegedly championed diversity, I do think that it is very worth noting that the biggest series of BuzzFeed were all predominantly white straight men. The girlies from BuzzFeed's Ladylike have repeatedly stated just how hard it was to get any sort of attention or funding from the higher ups at BuzzFeed. Now, if you're after a refresher about what BuzzFeed was known for, here's a listicle that I made of BuzzFeed's greatest hits. The dress. This seemingly color-changing dress was an inescapable part of 2015 popular culture, with celebrities like Ariana Grande and Taylor Swift speaking on the topic. Women painting with their period blood. Look, I'm a ladylike defender, but this was very much peak performative feminism. BuzzFeed Unsolved and their wheezing, the craze of wildlife BuzzFeed videos. I remember being so sad for every single one of these. The guy who ate fruit for the first time, people taking a quiz to see how privileged they are, and in a surprise to no one, Ned Fulmer was the most privileged person in that video. Speaking of Ned, the Try Guys cheating scandal. Side note, I cannot believe that Ned Fulmer managed to get tickets to the Eras tour. He did not deserve to be there. He did not deserve to hear Death by a Thousand Cuts as his surprise song. I bet he hated hearing her sing illicit affairs. The Am I Gay quiz that determined many of our sexualities in our youth, and that time that Lindsay and Jazz slighted Sophia Nygaard in a video, and the ensuing war between SARF stans and BuzzFeed video, with many thinking that BuzzFeed was copying SARF, to the point where BuzzFeed started having to include date and timestamps in their videos to cover their asses. However, love you Lindsay, your Palm Springs vlog is one of my favourite things to fall asleep to. BuzzFeed at its prime was the pinnacle of youth media and was the most enviable job for young, artsy, progressive millennials with penchants for infinity scarves and saying things like, "Remember Rugrats? This is them now. Feel old yet?" So what happened? I think that there are many reasons for BuzzFeed's death. From people getting sick of Obama-era optimism, which was characteristic of millennial content, to very valid complaints brought up in the plethora of why I left BuzzFeed videos, the low-hanging fruit content like quizzes and listicles, occasionally poor quality journalism, and that a large part of the audience were teenagers and young adults, who as they grow up tend to turn on and discard the things that they once beloved in their youth. Gen Z may have grown up with listicles and watching tasty videos in class. Yes, I am speaking from personal experience here. But they were starting to mature. They went from being the ones watching the videos to the ones creating them. They were becoming the future of the media landscape. And as such, started a generational war. It is a rite of passage for every generation to make fun of the one that came before them. And boy, did millennials give us so much to make fun of them for. Shitty taste in memes, skinny jeans, side parts, the love of rose gold, the term adulting, fugly statement necklaces, the phrase doggo. Saying that just sent shivers down my spine. Millennials wore their heart on their sleeve and they were so jubilantly optimistic. And that didn't sit right with Gen Z, a generation built on self consciousness and irony, bred from being online their whole lives. And in so many ways, Buzzfeed was millennialism personified. The danger of tying your brand and your identity so closely to one generation is that it's harder to reinvent yourself. Being an inescapable part of a generation at the end of the day is a double-edged sword. In the year 2020, we saw millennials crashing out left, right, and center on TikTok because of the word chuggy.
And I'm proud to be a millennial with my side part and skinny jeans.
It was a wake-up call of sorts to millennials that they are no longer the cool kids on the internet. They are now as uncool as boomers. I distinctly remember working at a media job and we were not allowed to make any pointed references to generations because we were so scared of contributing negatively and furthering this generational divide. But somewhere along the way, the soldiers retreated. A white flag or perhaps a mason jar was waved, and there was peace between the generations. Perhaps because we're saving our energy to fight boomers, or maybe because we're actually potentially facing real life wars, we have put the generational ones aside for now. And then came millennial core videos highlighting the cooler and more enviable parts of being a millennial. Girls, Broad City, Lord, Tumblr, American Apparel, Twee Fashion, Buzzfeed, Marina, Sky, The Bold Type, High Infidelity. And then almost overnight, millennials were cool again. The first key factor that I credit with the millennial renaissance has to be the inevitable cycle that we see generation after generation where we look back at the generation before us and romanticize it. During BuzzFeed's heyday, they were religiously posting about just how cool the 90s and 2000s were. Like they seemed like they were working for big nostalgia. Nostalgia is one of the most lucrative and powerful marketing tools in existence, and BuzzFeed milked that for all it was worth. Side note, I would love it if someone at BuzzFeed would do a tongue-in-cheek listicle about the 15 things that you remember if you grew up watching BuzzFeed video. And it's things like watching BuzzFeed tasty videos when you're hungry instead of actually cooking, checking to see if Sophia and Freddie are still following each other on Instagram, and Googling if Eugene Lee Yang is straight. Over the past few years, my generation has cycled through a plethora of identities. Brat, cottagecore, I'm just a girl. By 2025, have we run out of identities or are we just looking to the past for inspiration? Millennial core is not the first, nor will it be the last time that a 2010s aesthetic goes viral online. Lest we forget Rockstar's Girlfriend, which was largely inspired by Alexa Chung and that one piece she wrote for The Cut, How to Date a Rockstar. I feel like that article is the millennial equivalent of Shakespeare. Speaking of Brat Summer, Charlie XCX being pop's current it girl and the return of Lorde, in my opinion, has done millennials wonders for their image. No longer are millennials crashing out on the internet about teenagers making fun of their aggressive side parts. They are the tastemakers again. But not all things millennial are cool again, so why BuzzFeed? BuzzFeed was such a fundamental part of so many people's youth, and despite being a punching bag for many years, it never really left the zeitgeist. Something has kept us coming back to BuzzFeed time and time again, in a way unique to them and uncommon of other personality-driven media companies like Bon Appetit. Which, side note, if anyone happens to want a video on the last great American media dynasty, Bon Appetit Test Kitchen, I will happily oblige. BuzzFeed's place in the cultural lexicon in my eyes was cemented in 2022 during the aforementioned Ned Fulmer Try Guys cheating fiasco. Zach Kornfeld in a Tripod episode right after the scandal said something really revealing about the reception to the scandal, saying,
The silver lining in this weird phrase, but it was realizing the impact that our content and then even that BuzzFeed generation that we were a part of had on so many people and it touched part of their lives. I'll say I wish we had found out a different way.
This scandal was much more of a cultural moment than when Adam Levine cheated on his wife, which shocked mainstream media to no end because they were like, how could you care more about this guy that we've never heard of than this mainstream musician? People severely underestimated the parasocial relationship that BuzzFeeders had established with their audience. Ned commodified his relationship in a way that Adam didn't. And Ned's relationship was his entire brand and personality. He was the wife guy. And this identifier was what destroyed him, outside the cheating and HR violations and saying it was consensual. The scale of this scandal cannot be understated. It was mainstream news. SNL did a horrific and biased parody of it. Videos on YouTube analyzing the drama regularly get hundreds of thousands of views. People didn't forget about BuzzFeed. Something just had to stoke the embers that had been long burning in our souls, and this scandal did just that. It helped BuzzFeed gain some sort of societal relevance and made us all less shy to talk about it. I think that this scandal, in a very particular way, validated the way in which BuzzFeed had such a large impact on our generation. I think that a very similar pipeline can be seen with the TV show Glee. It was considered peak television for its first few seasons, but then by the end of its run, it was deemed really uncool. But in 2020, we saw the tide turn in the favor of Gleeks, and by 2025, it is a very common cultural touchpoint for many young people. A similar thing, I believe, is happening with BuzzFeed. Another scandal that unquestionably impacted the reassessing of BuzzFeed is the Watcher scandal of a year ago. The BuzzFeed Golden Boys of three guys sitting on a couch pipeline needs to be studied.
If I had a nickel for every time I was doomed by a puppet, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
And from a positive perspective, Quinta Brunson is single-handedly bringing back the network's sitcom with her show Abbott Elementary, which features ex-BuzzFeed alum in supporting roles and in the writer's room. However, all of this romanticization does feel like people viewing the era through rose gold tinted glasses. BuzzFeed did more or less pimp out its employees' identities, traumas, and experiences and treated them incredibly poorly back, often leaving the employees feeling dehumanized. BuzzFeed was guilty of mining political causes for financial gain, and while they are not the first people in media to do this, it was the first time that many of us witnessed it, possibly even being one of the first of the digital age. BuzzFeed fostered a toxic workplace environment that would drive interns to steal other interns' work credit cards and run up fraudulent purchases and ruin SD cards with Lost Try Guys videos on it, all in an attempt to thwart their perceived competition for a job. In a recent episode of The Tripod, Keith Habersberger revealed how the company tried to trick the employees to sign over their likeness and their quote, life story to the company. People like Kristen were so worked to the bone that it took them years for their physical and mental health to recover. And when layoffs happened, the people left at the company who were mourning their best friends getting fired were told repeatedly how they should be grateful that they even have a job, and then they had to take on double the workload for the same amount of money. BuzzFeed was not a happy-go-lucky workplace family. It was the opposite. And here I was thinking that we were all on the same page, that BuzzFeed was morally iffy at best and unethical at worst. But alas, in the wise words of Miss Swift, nostalgia is a mind's trick. And now dream about working at BuzzFeed in its prime has become a very common fantasy, ethics be damned. And I would be a hypocrite to say that I don't in some ways yearn for that. By trade, outside of YouTube, I'm a social producer and writer. While I was a social producer at Refinery 29 Australia, I worked under the same media publication umbrella as Vice, Kotaku, Pedestrian, and a bunch of other pubs. And when we're all in the office together, we would all just be like, oh my God, this feels like how people working in BuzzFeed in the 2010s would feel. I mean, heck, we even had 2 ex-BuzzFeed Australia staff members working in the office. I remember when one of them was giving me tutorials on how to use microphones in my second week, and I was internally fangirling. I was like, oh my God, Nick Ray from BuzzFeed Australia is giving me microphone lessons. My 16-year-old self is gagged. In the aforementioned episode of The Tripod, Keith and Zach discuss this rise of BuzzFeed nostalgia. They more or less liken this phenomenon to a cost of living crisis and a generational identity crisis.
BuzzFeed and millennialism are almost one and the same.
Oh,
They
yeah.
are, yeah.
That culture hand in hand skipping through a field. And so I think for a long time, Gen Z looked at that as that is cringe. Something seemingly has entered the water. Something has turned. And as of the last couple months, I have seen Gen Z yearning for millennial.
I know why.
Go ahead.
You got it?
Gen Z is older and they're miserable too.
Keith jokes about how Gen Z is miserable and have realized that they are going through a similar hardship to what millennials were facing when entering the workforce post the 2008 financial crash. Zach was quick to point out the distinction, however, that what millennials faced was a recession and how us Gen Zers are moving towards a depression, which is far more severe. Zach also speaks on how he is getting recognized more frequently now than he has in years. Also, I gotta say, please watch this full podcast because they release so much BuzzFeed tea. It is such an interesting watch. I also think it's worth noting that this video in which they are discussing BuzzFeed nostalgia is one of their most viewed videos in ages. One idea that I keep on coming back to in my mind is how we have had so many discussions in these past few years about reconnecting with your inner child. But did anyone ever stop to consider that the person that we need to reconnect with is our 14-year-old self? Lord Summer, new Hunger Games book, Gaga Cella, Peplums, the return of boho fashion, hopefully not culturally appropriative this time. I'm looking at you, Vanessa Hudgens. For better or worse, the 2010s are back. And like sands through the hourglass, everything that we once loved when we were younger is going to have a cultural reassessing and reobsessing. So where does this leave BuzzFeed? A deeply imperfect media company, a visionary regarding the landscape of social media, creating trends and formats that are still relevant to this day, a launchpad for so many of YouTube's brightest stars, a place that felt like a solace for people who didn't see themselves represented in traditional media. BuzzFeed's legacy will remain a complicated one, and that's perfectly okay and normal. No media company is going to have a perfect 100% net positive impact on the world and the people who watch their content. But if for nothing else, I'm glad that BuzzFeed has brought some of my favorite creatives like Sophia Nygaard and Quinta Brunson to my attention. But then another thing I often think about is how I would not have realized that I was asexual if not for watching BuzzFeed videos. My pipeline was watching BuzzFeed, watching Ladylike, following up on what they were doing years later, watching Chantel Houston's video where she talked about being demisexual, and then I figured out that I was asexual through that. So I owe a lot of my personal discovery to BuzzFeed in a very particular way, which I know is a common experience for many. And I, for one, cannot wait until we see the social network style movie created about BuzzFeed. I hope you enjoyed this video, cuties. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and let me know in the comments your thoughts on BuzzFeed nostalgia, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!